When I was a child, I used to live in a small city with my mom and dad. There were very few residents in that area, but there were a ton of old houses and buildings. Me, personally, I had felt a lot of creepy vibes in our house. It had nothing to do with something horrendous, such as a murderous intent or a suppressive feeling. There was just this creepy and unnatural feeling to it. One summer day, me and my family were at the local pool. My dad and mom had the day off, so me, my parents, and my older sister chose to head to the pool. Unfortunately, we had only gotten there for an hour or two when it unexpectedly began to rain. We stood there, hoping that it would stop raining, but it only got progressively worse. After half an hour or so, it began thundering, and lightning became visible in the distance. Seeing that it would be too dangerous to still be outdoors, the pool staff decided to close down the pool for the day. Before going home, we stopped at a small grocery store and made sure to stock up on food and supplies in case things got even worse. When we got home, my mom tells me to put the frozen food in the freezer outside. I walked over to the freezer, which was just outside our back door on the porch, when I got this dreadful feeling. I ignored it, thinking that maybe the day was about to become much worse, and called it my intuition. Well, as I was packing the things, out of my peripheral vision, I saw a black figure. It had a body of a human, but that was practically all I could make out of it. As I began turning my head, the figure had simply vanished. At this point, I thought that the weather was really getting to me, so I quickly packed the rest, shut the freezer lid, and went back indoors. Nothing happened for the rest of the day until bedtime. When I laid in bed, I had this sharp pain in my stomach. It wouldn't go away, and I was forced to mentally block it out just so I could get some rest. In my house, we have an attic. The attic isn't used at all, other than to store some unused things, such as books and sports equipment. We never had much use for it, and found it rather a waste of space. To get to the attic, you had to walk down the hallway opposite the washroom to the very end of the hallway and go up a series of steps. Well, that night, I had a terrible and lucid dream. I had just finished using the washroom and began walking back to my room. I began hearing someone's voice coming from the other side of the house. It felt familiar, yet unfamiliar at the same time. I began walking towards it, closing the distance between me and the strange voice. As I kept walking, I located the sound, realizing that it was coming from the attic. I slowly walked up the steps to the attic and grabbed the doorknob. At that very moment, my stomach began aching in so much pain. Much more painful than before I had fallen asleep. The door opened without me even turning it or pushing it. It revealed an empty room with nothing except the freezer we had outside. The sound had stopped. I knew not to move at this point. I stopped my legs from taking another step forward, but the freezer was coming towards me, getting closer and closer to me, as if having a life of its own. I wanted to stop it from moving. I wanted to put my hands up and cover my face, but I couldn't. I could feel my limbs, my blood moving in the veins. but I could not for the life of me move. The freezer got right in my face when a black figure appeared from behind it. It lunged towards me and I fell backwards. Blood began spewing out of my mouth like a waterfall. I couldn't breathe. I finally woke up, drenched in sweat. I laid in bed for what felt like an eternity. Not wanting to move. Not knowing if there was something with me in my room. All I knew was that it was still dark outside. With all my might and courage, I looked at my clock. It read 3:50 a.m. After laying there for another 20 or 30 minutes, I ended up falling back asleep. I don't know if all of this has any meaning, and I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but that nightmare really gave me a scare. For some reason, after that nightmare, I felt that there was a strong presence in the house, lurking at every corner and watching us. Fortunately, after a year, we moved out of there and moved to a larger city. Since then, I haven't experienced anything nearly as scary or horrifying as that. But to this very day, the nightmare still sticks with me. My name is Sarah. I am an 18-year-old girl, and this happened to me last summer in the middle of August. I was walking home after going over to one of my friend's house to hang out and do typical things a normal girl would do for a few hours. Like gossiping about a handsome guy, eating out, watching movies. You get the idea. Now, I knew I could have just drove, but it was only a 15-minute walk, so I decided to do the latter just so I could enjoy the fresh summer air. Anyways, it was around 9:30 p.m. By this time, everyone in the neighborhood has settled in their homes for the night, leaving the street devoid of any signs of activity. On my way home, I had that cliche feeling that I was being watched. I constantly looked around me to see if I was being followed, but luckily there were no signs of life. Or, that's what I thought. I was just a 3-minute walking distance from my house when I reached an intersection. Just as I was about to cross, a fully grown man who clearly looked to be somewhere in his 40s came out from behind a light pole without any warning and scared the living daylights out of me. I immediately noticed that half of his face was obscured since he had the hood over him, blocking his eyes, but it looked like he could still see. He was wearing a hoodie and baggy pants, even though it was something like 80 degrees Fahrenheit outside, or 27 degrees Celsius. "Hi there, young lady," said the man in his raspy voice. "That's a really nice outfit you got there, and pretty gorgeous jewelry, too." His breath was reeked of cigarettes. To be honest, what I was wearing wasn't really that fancy at all. Just to give you a description, I was wearing a sleeveless plain white tank top, dark blue jeans, the ones that extend to the ankles, and red Adidas shoes. I always had a thing for tank tops. Oh well, we have different tastes in clothes, right? However, when he said I had nice jewelry, I was taken aback. I clearly wasn't wearing any jewelry. No ring, no necklace, no watch, nothing. He then went on saying how attractive I was, while awkwardly running his hand down one of my shoulders. I had shoulder-length brunette hair, and I was a slim person, attracting many men, usually around my age. But this guy was clearly about 30 years older than me. I tried to talk myself out of the conversation with this sketchy guy, go home and try to figure out all about this, but he prevented that from happening. He forcefully offered to escort me home, but I declined multiple times. I was too smart to fall for something like that. But he wasn't about to give up. He then asked me if I was married, and I lied to him, saying yes. Even though I can tell he was starting to lose his cool just by the change of tone in his voice. Most likely as a desperate last-ditch effort to probably win me over, he cut right to the chase and straight up asked me if I wanted to go out on a date with him, and flashed this really hideous and creepy grin. Honestly, I still cringe to this day, and feel like hitting something in anger just thinking about it. I just about had enough with this guy. I told him in his face that I am not interested and turned to leave. But he grabbed me by my shoulder and tried dragging me away to only God knows where. During the struggle, I saw a white van with the windows tinted and license plate suspiciously covered by duct tape. I could only assume that was where he was trying to take me. Quite honestly, I thought those were the final moments of my life right then and right there. I tried so hard not to cry as I was practically on the verge of tears. But that's when I remembered I took karate classes a few years back and I still remember a few moves I learned. So I used this as an advantage for the first time and kicked him as hard as I could on his shin. Believe it or not, it worked. He screamed in agony, yelling in pain, cursing and stumbling backwards to the ground while clutching his shin. But not before letting go of me. Before I could get out of there, he tried getting me one last time by grabbing on to my tank top straps. But I easily took his hand off of it, since he was heavily weakened by my kick. I booked it out of there, took a slight detour route to my house to fool the man if he was following me, and I never dared to look back behind me the whole way. When I got home, I didn't call the cops for some reason, nor did I tell anyone else about it, not even my own family, probably because I was still traumatized by what happened. It all happened so quickly. I was also shocked that something like this would happen in my area. The city I lived in wasn't well known for sick and disgusting crimes like these. And everyone in my neighborhood were all extremely friendly. Nowadays, I regret not telling anyone about the incident, because now there's still a crazy psychopath out there looking for his next victim, or even worse, trying to look for me again. From then on, whenever I walked somewhere, I always made sure I had someone with me. Never did I walk alone again, especially at night. One time when I was 12, my best friend at the time and I were having a sleepover at her house. As a visual, the house was pretty old and was filled with tons of antiques and old furniture. She lived at her grandmother's house. The basement was one of those where you wouldn't dare go down alone because it just felt off and spooky. Because we were spooked by the basement, we decided it would be fun to sleep in a very long hallway on the 3rd floor, on opposite sides of the hall for some reason. The whole night before bed, we were playing a game where we would pretend to be spies. So we would hide in the closets and sneak up on her mom and grandma. I was often homesick at sleepovers as a kid, and when it was time for bed, I just read my book by a nightlight on my end of the hall. Then, right across from me, I see my friend get up and run towards me. Innocent me says, "Are we going to play spies again?" No response. I just giggle, and I'm excited to play again. So I follow the figure into a bedroom closet and close the door. I'm trying to communicate with her, but she's not answering. I look over to where she is supposed to be beside me, but no one is there. I decide to leave the closet because I couldn't fathom what just happened. I walk across the long hall and saw that she was fast asleep this whole time. I could never sleep there ever again, and I'm still really spooked by the fact that I ran into a closet with a mysterious, ghostly figure. My Aunt Tammy has a collection of porcelain doll clowns. She always kept them neatly in an old wooden antique cabin with a glass display that housed 20 to 30 collected pieces. She has had them for as long as I can remember, so they never bothered me. My aunt only had one daughter, but she loved children and wanted her daughter to have kids her age around. So she would get all her nieces and nephews and have us spend the weekends there. My cousins and my parents welcomed the break and knew my aunt was great with kids. The only thing my mother ever opposed was just one thing: her scary stories. When we were young, she would retell her horror stories. She would gather us around in a circle as if we were camping, only in her large Victorian house, and around her fireplace instead of a campfire. She would stand in the middle as she recited tales that riveted and scared us all. Some from her childhood, others she would create on the spot that starred us all in roles. She was all of our favorite aunt for this reason. The less tolerant of my cousins would be too afraid and ask to be picked up by their parents. But I wasn't afraid of anything, or so I thought. One day, I was staying over at my aunt's as a teenager in high school. Our visits weren't as often as they once were, but I still came over to watch new movies, especially horror flicks that my mother wouldn't allow at home. And this day, I was given permission to stay over at her place. By this time, her dining room had changed. Modern things such as a computer desk and gym equipment infected her room, making the old collection of dolls much more peculiar because of the juxtaposition. Though I was as familiar with her house, I couldn't help but look at the dolls differently. Though I have heard of some of my classmates having a phobia of clowns, I never had such a thought. People being afraid of clowns? They're harmless and fun. However, in hindsight, I hadn't seen the It movie. Anyways, I remember just how silly I thought this so-called phobia was. Clowns make you laugh, they don't make you scared. That night, I woke up suddenly, with a cold sweat and a terribly dry throat. I went downstairs to get a drink. I ventured down the steps and walked into one of their 2 dining rooms. This one being where they kept the porcelain dolls. As I walked by in the dark, everything was just so quiet, which was unusual for my normally loud family. They were all asleep, as it was already 4 a.m. at the time. I remember feeling this sense of unease permeate through the air. A strangely tense sense of dread whispered in the shadowy areas of the room. And before I made it to my destination, I swear I saw the shadows of the clowns move on the floor next to where my feet were. I quickly looked back at the antique cabinet. They were as still as statues. They had not moved an inch. Frightened to death, I quickly abandoned my plan of getting a drink and darted to the front room where my aunt was sleeping with her TV still on. The TV screen's haunting blue light flickered sporadically on my aunt's face, making me feel only more unsettled. At this point, I had the urge to use the washroom. I looked back through the traditional double door opening to the house where the dolls were located. My only light is the one from the television, partially lighting the smiles of the clowns, like lightning strikes in a dark field, illuminating their once benign faces to something much more sinister. I quickly walk past them, shielding my eyes as I make it to the hallway where the bathroom is located. I did my business and began thinking just how crazy I'm being. There's absolutely nothing there. It was all in my head. I began washing my hands when suddenly I hear a small voice giggle and say my name. I stood there, in the bathroom, frozen, unable to move. What I can only describe as a shadow began crawling behind me. My senses began crashing back to me, and I quickly ran out of the bathroom, all the while the shadows seemingly darting closer and closer towards me, their movements more erratic than ever before. There was something after me. I make it into the front room, sweating profusely, and I put the covers over my head as if to shield myself from what felt like an attack. I spent the rest of the night on the oversized chair next to the love seat that my aunt slept on. In the morning, when light came in, it was as though the world shifted to normal again. When my aunt asked me why I decided to sleep downstairs instead of upstairs with my other cousins and siblings, I brushed it off as me merely missing her. My aunt, being a great cook, asked me if I wanted something to eat. I say yes, and all seems right in the world again. She begins to venture through the dining room with the dolls that leads to the kitchen. I almost allow myself to forget the previous night's strange activities, when suddenly she asks me, "James, did you move my clown dolls?" Confused, I rush to the dining room and I see the dolls' heads all turned the same way. What's even more strange is that they all seemed locked onto where I was sleeping behind the wall. I never told my aunt or anyone else about that night. I still, to this day, am not afraid of clowns. However, clown dolls are another story. I am a 15-year-old girl that recently moved to Germany. My father lost his job prior to this, and we decided to live in Germany and rent a very cheap and affordable apartment on the 3rd floor. The thing is, this neighborhood is not so safe. To be honest, there is a lot of crime going on, especially due to prisoners being let out and released because of the ongoing pandemic. But anyways, I can't blame my parents. Like I said, they couldn't afford a safer place. Back to my story, my parents left me home alone to visit some friends in the far center of the city to sign a work contract. The meeting started at 8 p.m. and lasted until 10 p.m., and I was left at home during that time. Keep in mind that we live far away from the center. Not only that, but there is a lot of traffic. So I would expect my parents to come back home somewhere between 1 or 2 a.m. Anyways, after they left, I locked my front door and I started listening to some music and goofing off. At around 1 a.m., I started hearing some strange noise coming from outside my door. Like someone was trying to open the front door. I stopped my music and put my headphones down to go check it out. I go to the front door and I see that the door handle was moving. Without a doubt, someone was trying to break into my house. I stepped closer to the door and looked through the peephole. I saw a tall, big man in a hoodie and in all black. He looked like he was in his late 40s and his face was covered in scars and wrinkles. His eyes were bloody red, like he had been doing some illegal substances. He looked absolutely crazy. What was worse is that in his hands was something sharp, something shiny. It looked like a butcher's knife. I freaked out, but I covered my mouth, trying not to make any sound, and walked to the kitchen. I grabbed my dad's fake gun to try and scare the intruder if he manages to break in, and I sat there for a few minutes trying to wrap my head around this scenario. A few minutes later, I gathered all my courage and walked to the front door. I peeped through the peephole again, however, he was nowhere to be found. I began walking back to the kitchen when all of a sudden I heard a woman scream. Without hesitation, I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. Soon after, the police arrived, and after I told them what had happened, they did some investigating and found my neighbor's dead body in her apartment. Her foot was cut off, and unfortunately, they found her foot next to my door. It has been a few days since then, and unfortunately, they still have not found the man. Honestly, I don't know what would have happened if the front door was not locked. And sometimes I lay awake thinking about that. So, stay safe, and don't forget to lock your doors when you are home alone.